Hey, welcome back, folks. It's been a while now since I've done a video. It may not be a while since you've seen one. I'm not sure how frequently I'm getting these posted. But it has been a while since I've had any time to work in the workshop. So we're back here now, and I started working on a headboard for a bed. So again, I'm using wood from skids that I brought home from work. So this here these are the pieces that I've made for the end post or the legs for the headboard. So I still need to fill in the small crack between where the wood's joined and the nail holes yet. Just the way I put these together. So I got two 2x4s, one in front of the other for thickness that way. I put another one on the end just to make this post wider. Some of them I got turned around. This one's not too bad. All of the nail holes on this one, all there is a few. I'm going to end up on the back side. The rest of them I managed to get turned towards the inside. Didn't do as well on this one. This will be an end, so you won't really see it when you're looking straight at it. This will be the side that I've chosen that you'll see. So I've just got some nail holes to fill down that one piece. So that's those. These are the 2x4s, two together again for thickness. These 2x4s will be the top rail that runs between the legs, and then a little bit further down there'll be another rail that runs between the two. Originally I'd done a rough sketch of this just on a piece of paper. What I wanted to do was something like this. So the two posts, 2x4s running across, and I had split it in the middle and was going to do like a couple of sunrises, rays coming off the sun, that sort of thing. So I laid out the post and the 2x4s over top of this piece of cardboard that I had on the floor, and decided I'm not going to put the 2x4 in the center. It's going to create each of these two spots would have been very narrow, and I think it would have looked strange. So I'm eliminating the 2x4 in the center. Just going to do one circle in the center of this, and with the rays coming out from that. So this cardboard that I've cut is the exact size that it needs to be to go between the two legs and the 2x4 top and bottom. Then I found something with a nice radius to it. In this case, I think it was a hula hoop I found laying around. Traced out this circle so it's nice and even. So the next thing I want to do now, I got to cut this out, and I've got this wood being clamped up. So I'll lay that portion of the template over top of this. We'll retrace it out onto this, and we'll try cutting it out with a small bandsaw that I have and see how that works to cut out the arch in this. And then we'll take the boards. So the idea is that these are going to work around off of that, and they're going to fan out to cover in the rest of that area. So we will need to figure out the width at the top of the board and how much of a width we're going to need at the bottom of the board. So if we're working with something that's 3 inches wide and it takes, I don't know, maybe 20 boards to go around and cover the top portion of the circle, we'll have to reduce the size at the bottom of the board so those same 20 boards can do this inside radius, which is going to be a lot smaller. Okay, so we've got everything cut. The lighting's not real good at this end, but I've got it laid out down here. So we've tapered all of these, so a little bit wider, and then they come down to being narrow at this end. And I've got penciled out just where it needs to be cut off now to square things up. And there's a little bit of a pencil line there. It's hard to see. I know it's kind of dark down at this end of the room. Hopefully that'll match up the curve. So I think I'm going to get a thin piece of plywood to use as a back for that. Right now it's just sitting on that cardboard still that I had. I'll get a thin piece, 1/4 inch or something like that. I'm going to glue all that down to the plywood just so it can't move around before I cut it. So I'll do that, get everything cut, and then I think I need to do that wood filling that I talked about on the nail holes, do some final sanding, and we'll be ready to assemble this. Yeah, I think we'll try and see if we can sand that down a little bit to get a bit more of a curve there. So that worked well. Now we'll switch over and we'll get a sander out. Okay, I think that'll do. The blade had twisted a little bit on that bandsaw. It couldn't see it looking at it, but when I started sanding, the sander was hitting the one side but not the other, so it had been cut on a little bit of an angle. But the sander's making contact all the way around from one side to the other now. I'm happy with the arch that we have in there and the way it's turned out. So we're going to call that done for that portion of it. Okay, so where we're at, so we got that thin piece of plywood. It cost a whole $5 at the hardware store. And it's just over 1/8 of an inch thick, so really thin stuff. We've glued all of our cutout pieces that we had down to it. Now, this is the first time I've tried to do something like this. One of the problems I encountered was because this is so thin, it's more flexible, and I didn't count on that being so flexible, so every time I try and move this thing, you can hear the glue starting to crack and wanting to let go underneath. But we've got it together. I think it's going to hold. The piece that I cut out on the bandsaw, so after I sanded it, so we had our finished profile, then I laid it on here and I traced it out. And then we'll come back and we'll cut this off nice and square and get rid of all of those other ends of boards. I'll probably have to get someone to give me a hand with that, because as I said, it's very flexible, and as I'm pushing it through the table saw, it's coming out the other side. I'm going to need someone to support it, or it's just going to bend and all the glue is going to crack on this thing. So what I'm not sure of yet, I was hoping to use the router to put a groove in the center of this, maybe 1/8 of an inch deep, just so it would slide up over the edges of these, so if there was any little gaps at all, you wouldn't see it because it would be set in the groove. So cutting this on the same profile as what this arch is, but then wanting to move it up a little bit after I put a groove in this, I'm not sure how that'll fit, if that'll change the archway at all, because you'll actually be a smaller radius because you'll be 1/8 of an inch deeper once again. But we'll try it, we'll see how it works out. So cutting this radius out of this is the next step. I've got some 2x4s, they're actually the 2x4s for this frame underneath here to lift this up off the table saw. Just making sure that that's far enough that when I'm cutting around here, I'm not going to cut into those. There was another another one someplace. Maybe it was just the one. I thought there was a second one that started lifting, but it might be just that center one. Okay, so we've got the archway cut out. We did that with the jigsaw by hand, and I got my son to come out and help me so I could run this through the table saw and trim this off nice and square. Because this was a little bit flimsier than I wanted it to be with that thin piece of plywood on the back, I needed someone to support the back end of it coming out of the table saw so it didn't just flop over. So he came out, gave me a hand. So we just ran that through by eye to try and follow a pencil line to square it up. I think that turned out okay. I put the square on it afterwards, and it is quite square. It's not perfect, but I think it's going to be good enough. So I have the router table set up, and I'm not sure how this will work out. I tried looking at different ways of doing this, and this is the only way I could really come up with. The router table, I was hoping that I could bring the bit up enough that it would just allow it to sink in as I run that through up against the fence. Because of the thickness of this table and everything, there just isn't enough adjustment in the router to bring this blade up high enough to get into the center line of where I need it. So it's a 3/4 inch wide bit. That's exactly how wide of a groove I need for that panel. So I've got the fence set up so that when you run this through, and I'll show you from this angle, that groove will be in the center of this. So there'll be an equal amount of material left on both sides. But the idea I'm going to try is keeping it up against that fence and running it through this way and just letting the end of that bit cut a groove out. I hope this works out. I don't want to have to try and remake this piece and figure out another way to do that. So we'll give it a shot. We'll see what it does. Well, it's not perfect by any means. There's one spot here where I must have tipped this way against the fence, so I cut into what's going to be the front side of this. So when you drop the panel in, I'm going to have to put a little bit of wood fill in where that spot is. Other than that, it seems to be a fairly even cut towards the face of this. So when the panel drops in, it should give it a nice looking seam. We won't know until we try putting it into the panel in there to see just how it's going to fit. Not the best way to do it, but I couldn't think of any other way to get that done at the moment. So I will try a fit, see if it worked out. Okay, got the camera moved around. So it's back a little bit, so it might be harder to see, but that fits in there very nice, and it achieved exactly what I wanted to. So now all of these boards that we put together as the fan, when they're in that groove, even if these aren't cut in a really nice arch, it doesn't matter. You don't see the edge of them any longer. There was that one spot where I moved this over a bit when I was going through the router table. It does show up, so I will have to fill that one little spot with a little bit of wood fill. One thing I didn't count on, I knew I was going to go 1/4 inch deep with this groove in this piece of wood. And I wanted 1/4 inch extra material here sticking up, so the 2x4 that this rests on in the frame will have 1/4 inch groove in it also to accept the edge of this panel. But because this sits 1/4 inch lower than where I had originally measured, I have 1/2 inch material here. So I'm going to trim these off another 1/4 of an inch shorter on both sides. So I'll do that. The 2x4s that make up the frame and the post, they've all been glued together. They were clamped. I'm going to run them through the planer one more time. So if there's any variations in the seams of the 2x4s when I glued them together, it'll make them nice and smooth and the consistent thickness again. So that's the next thing I'm going to do, is run those through the planer. And then I need to get that same 3/4 inch groove routed into the ones that will accept this panel for the frame. And then I don't want a really sharp square edge on the post and stuff for the legs. So I'm going to use just a 1/4 inch round over bit in the router, just to round the edge of this over a little bit so it's not a sharp 90-degree bend. Any finish that you put on that sharp of an edge, just a little bit of rubbing on it or anything, it's going to wear it right through very quickly, because you're not going to get a lot of material right on the edge of that. And it doesn't feel very good either. It is quite a sharp edge when you got a really 90-degree corner like that. So that's where I'm at. Okay, I'm going to walk over here with this and just show you what we've got set up. So we've got a different router. We have what they call a plunge router. So this one, and that's where it gets its name from. So these are the 2 pieces of wood that are going to be the 2x4s for the top and bottom of this panel. So one of them will run across there and the other one will run across there on the panel. So they need to have that groove routed into them from one end to the other. These 2 pieces are legs or a post, so they're only going to have a portion of this routed for the end of the panel to sit in. So back to this one, what we've done here, because these are big, heavy, awkward for that tiny little router table that I have. So I thought it would be better if I clamped them both side by side, nice and flat, and put a piece of guide on here, a guide wood. This router has one side that's flat on the base and the rest of it's rounded. So I can run that flat side up against that, have it clamped in the proper position that I need so that my bit is right in the middle of this piece of wood, and I can just run down there from one end to the other. Then I'll switch this over to this side, line everything up on this one, and I'll do the same on that 2x4. Then the next thing will be figuring out just where those 2x4s are going to sit. So if it's going to sit, you know, 1 inch down from the top, or maybe a 1/2 inch down from the top, so that I get this groove in the right spot. So I'll stop the video again here. I'm going to get that kind of stuff done, and then I need to still cut off that extra 1/4 of an inch off of these pieces of the panel, and then it'll be wood fill time. Okay, so we're back to this. Hasn't been long for you watching the video. For me, it's the next day now. After I got the router work done yesterday, I did the wood fill on the 2x4s and on the legs, let it dry, and I've sanded that. I did not do the wood filler on that panel that has like the fanned out wood yet, because as I said, it was a little bit flimsy. Any wood filler I put in, it's going to crack as soon as that board flexes a little bit. So that part's going to have to be done after it's assembled. So what I'm doing now, I've got a biscuit cutting tool, and for any of you that don't know what this is, there's a blade. So this rests on top of your wood, and you push the tool inwards. And when you do that, there's a blade that comes up and it cuts a small groove or a slot in the end of the wood. And I have these biscuits that you'd buy these already made. So I've set this up for how far down from the edge of the wood that I want it and how deep I want it to cut in based on the size of my biscuit. So half of the biscuit goes into this piece and you cut a mating groove like that in the other piece where this is going to go for the other half of that biscuit. So it gives you a larger gluing surface. It gives you a much stronger joint than just trying to glue a flat surface of this 2x4 to those posts. So this was a scrap piece of wood that I did it on just to get my measurements and stuff for the depth and for how far down from the edge I wanted it. So I got to cut those grooves in the ends of the 2x4s and line them up in the post where they're going to be and cut the matching grooves there. And then I think I'll be able to dry fit everything, make sure everything's going to fit good, that I don't have to trim anything. And if that all works out for the dry fit, then I'll be able to start gluing this up and do some assembly on it. All of those biscuit joints cut in the ends for our 2x4s to connect. We did that, we dry fit everything. Everything went together very well. So we glued it, clamped it overnight last night. I just removed all of the clamps and come in and did all the wood fill work. So there's not much, it looks like a lot of wood fill. It looks like we had a lot of problems or a lot of gaps. We didn't really. Some of these, and you'll see it better after I sand this stuff off, the cracks that are in here are really, really fine. They're just hairline cracks. So you spread the wood filler out a little bit as you're putting it on. But once we sand that off, some of these you won't even notice. There's so little that's actually needed to fill in. So we're going to let this sit overnight, make sure everything dries. There's some spots right along the edge where the panel goes into that post. I had a little bit wider gap than I wanted in some spots. So this may shrink a little bit as it dries, this wood filler. So we'll let this dry overnight, make sure if it wants to shrink that it's had a chance to do that. And we'll check it all again tomorrow night, see if it needs any more added. I don't think it will. And we'll get this thing sanded up, and then we'll take some of our scraps that we had from building this, and we'll try some different colored stains on them and see which one we like the best, and then we'll get her all stained up.